Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. 10 were killed and over 130 wounded in Iranian rocket strikes on Israel. Meanwhile, Iran reports 30 military personnel killed since Friday by Israeli airstrikes, prompting intensified attacks amid third day of crossfire. The US President Donald Trump said he and Russian President Vladimir Putin agreed on a phone call that the Israeli-Iran conflict should end, adding he also urged Putin to end the Ukraine war. Meanwhile, Russia's Rosatom will build Kazakhstan's first nuclear power plant. A minute's silence was held at King Charles III's birthday parade to honor victims of the Air India crash that killed at least 279 people in Ahmedabad, India. Meanwhile, authorities are still investigating the crash and inspecting other Boeing 787s after recovering the black box. One person was critically injured in a shooting at an anti-Trump protest in Salt Lake City in the US. The incident came as Trump marked his 79th birthday with a military parade amid nationwide protests and a Democratic lawmaker's assassination. Israeli forces reportedly launched a strike in Yemen targeting a senior Houthi leader, escalating regional tensions. Meanwhile, Israeli attacks killed at least 45 Palestinians in Gaza, including 15 near a US-backed aid site, drawing renewed outrage over civilian casualties. French President Emmanuel Macron will visit Greenland today to show European solidarity and support after the US President Donald Trump expressed interest in acquiring the territory. The trip signals strong support for Danish sovereignty and growing transatlantic tensions. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung will attend the G7 summit for Canada for his first diplomatic trip. Meanwhile, Japan's Prime Minister Ishiba set to meet Trump to demand an end to auto tariffs ahead of crucial elections in the G7 summit. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced that Ukrainian forces have recaptured a village in the northeastern Sumy region, despite 53,000 Russian troops in the area. The 51st G7 summit kicks off today in Kananaskis, Alberta, Canada, marking the 50th anniversary since the first gathering of the world's most advanced economies. Leaders including US President Donald Trump, French President Emmanuel Macron, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, and the EU President Ursula von der Leyen are attending. At the forefront of the summit is climate change, global economic stability, digital governance, and the development of coalitions and reliable partnerships to aid long-term security. However, this is a summit that is going to be overshadowed by the current Israel-Iran tensions and the war in Ukraine. Joining me on the telecast is my colleague Megha Sharma, Executive Editor of NewsX World, reporting live from the heart of the action, Kananaskis, Canada. Megha, how significant is the G7 Leaders Summit hosted by the new Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney?
Well, the G7 Leaders Summit led by Canada, hosted by Canada this time around in 2025 is very significant, keeping in mind the tariff wars and strife that has been going on for months together ever since US President Donald Trump came to power for his second term. He has been threatening countries big and small, including Canada, European Union, United Kingdom, Italy, France, Germany, which all form a part of G7 with tariffs. Thus far, there has been a thaw of sorts that has happened between America and these countries who have come to some sort of a negotiation or an agreement, if you may say. And there have been hopes that have been flagged by the President of United States of America, Donald Trump, as well as the heads of the states of other countries, that all is going to be good. There is going to be an equilibrium that is going to be sought and achieved after talks of the trade ministers, trade officers of Trump and the other nations, the G7 nations, as well as the invitee nations, including South Korea, Brazil, India, Saudi Arabia. There is, of course, the World Bank president who is also going to be present. There is, of course, going to be the European Union Commission president, Ursula von der Leyen is also going to be present. So it is the start of some sort of a reconciliation, if one may say, a hope between the United States and the rest of the world, an equilibrium being sought on the trade wars. The second most important thing, the G7 Leader Summit is obviously going to be overshadowed by the Iranian-Israeli conflict that has only gotten escalated in the last 48 hours. There have been ballistic missile strikes from the Israeli side, killing at least 78 people, including civilians, including commanders of the nuclear program and military establishments. That has unnerved Iran no end. Iran has retaliated, striking Israel. There have been 3 casualties from the Israeli side. There is, of course, going to be a fresh set of talks that have been planned on Sunday that are going to be negotiated between America and Iran. This is going to take place in Muscat in Oman. But thus far, after these strikes and counter strikes between Israel and Iran, no straightforward response has come from Iran, whether it will be any longer interested in these talks. There is, of course, the tensions that are rife between Ukraine and Russia, and whether there is any sort of hope that there is going to be a ceasefire that is going to be declared between both the countries. So these talks are obviously going to be overshadowed by these global conflicts that we are seeing around the world.
Now, zooming out to the bigger picture, Vega, the environment is fraught with fresh tensions between Israel and the US, as well as Iran, in wake of the Israeli offensive on Iran. Will the entire focus be diverted to that?
Yes, the G7 Leaders Summit is going to be overshadowed by the Iranian-Israeli conflict that has exacerbated in the last 48 hours. There have been casualties to the tune of 78 people, including civilians, including the nuclear scientists and the military establishments that have hit Iran and debilitated it. In a retaliation, a reprisal, Iran has struck Israel. There have been 3 casualties that have been reported from Jerusalem. US, on the other hand, has come out in full support of Israel and warned Iran once again that any of its attempts to enrich uranium for its nuclear program are going to be resisted, and there are going to be fresh strikes if Iran continues with its ambition for becoming a nuclear nation. The G7 nations have come out and supported US and Israel in their abomination of the nuclear program that Iran desperately wants to complete, which includes France, United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, and other nations. Meanwhile, in fact, these are the talks, these are the discussions that are going to be brought on the table, but keeping in mind there is only going to be a one-sided talk over here, because the G7 nations continuously believe that the uranium enrichment program of Iran is not feasible, cannot happen at any cost.
And how do you see the relationship between Trump and Carney, and thereby between US and Canada?
Well, it's interesting to see because as soon as Donald Trump came to power for his second term, he had admonished Justin Trudeau and wanted to time and again express his desire to take total control of Canada as the 51st state. Donald Trump, in fact, even imposed large-scale tariffs on the exports of steel, aluminum, lumber from Canada into United States of America. Now these tariffs since then have been halted in a bid to have closer trade negotiations between Trump's trade officers and the Canadian Trade Minister. Mark Carney, right after his election as the new Prime Minister of Canada, went straight. His first visit and a bilateral was with the US head of state Donald Trump. He came out jubilant and hopeful that these talks would lead to constructive collaboration between Canada and United States of America when it comes to trade and economic cooperation. So yes, it is an important landmark event between Canada and United States, particularly with regards to trade. Now the deadline for the pause that had been announced by the Trump administration to levy the huge percentage of tariffs on all countries, including Canada, it's been put on halt. It is going to be over in a couple of weeks' time, and Donald Trump is really hopeful that the negotiations will be struck, the deals will be signed, and there would not be any need for Trump to impose retaliatory tariffs and sanctions on the countries he feels are extracting a larger chunk of the pie from America and not paying enough tariffs on the American goods. So a bilateral is going to happen between Mark Carney and Donald Trump, and it remains to be seen what are the decisions the two leaders are going to make. Are there going to be any big announcements with regards to immigration laws, with regards to trade, with regards to economy, and we'll keep a close eye on that.
And on a related note, I want to shift to Ukraine. Zelensky has also been invited. And are we likely to witness bilaterals? What will come out of it?
It's also interesting to note that the Ukrainian president has been invited to the G7 leaders summit. He has been invited to the previous NATO talks and summits that had taken place in Europe. There have been a number of times that the French president and the German chancellor have shown solidarity and support to Ukraine and Vladimir Zelensky by way of holding bilaterals, trilaterals that have taken place. It is likely to happen that Zelensky holds a number of bilateral talks on the sidelines of the G7 leaders summit with President Trump, with Emmanuel Macron, the French president, with the German chancellor, Merz, and of course the Canadian counterpart Mark Carney. What comes of it is going to be interesting, because while the NATO nations have come together and resolved to increase their defense spending and not be completely reliant on America for defense infrastructure and funding, and have continued to give military support, financial support to Ukraine in its fight against Russia, speaks volumes about the kind of discourse that is likely to happen at the G7 leaders summit. Ukraine will continue to push for increased sanctions against Russia, which NATO nations, barring Donald Trump, are completely in support of. There have been a number of times more threats have come from Germany and France to impose more tariffs, impose more sanctions on Russia, although these continue to be warnings, and in the hopes that Trump is going to negotiate a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia, which seems to be at this point of time in a limbo because Russia has its own set of conditions in place. Russia speaks about how it is not going to retreat from the territories it has already occupied on the western side of Ukraine. It has also spoken about how there needs to be sanctions that need to be lifted from Russia, which the Western nations, both these conditions that have been put by Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, have been negated by the NATO nations, by the European nations. Are these talks between Zelensky and the other leaders at the G7 are going to be of any significance, of any importance in wake of Russia continuing to counter the demands, the proposals that have been put forth, is something that remains to be seen.
Thank you very much, Megha Sharma, for joining us all the way from Kananaskis, Canada. Canadian Prime Minister Carney kicked off a busy schedule in Alberta ahead of the G7 summit. He will meet Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and South African President Cyril Ramaphosa in Calgary. Later in Kananaskis, he will meet representatives of the Treaty 7 First Nations and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. Meanwhile, Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba is on his way to press President Donald Trump to drop punitive auto tariffs. The two will meet on the sidelines of the summit. Australia's Albanese will also hold face-to-face talks with Trump, focusing on tariffs and the AUKUS Defense Pact. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung plans several bilateral meetings, hoping to address tariff issues and boost ties. All eyes now are on Kananaskis as world leaders gather for crucial talks. Now we move on to Israel-Gaza. U.S. President Donald Trump has warned Iran against attacking the United States in any way, saying that it would face the might of the U.S. military at levels never seen before. Trump said in a post on his Truth Social platform that the U.S. had nothing to do with an overnight attack on Iran and that they can easily get a deal done between Iran and Israel and end the conflict. This comes after the next round of U.S.-Iran nuclear negotiations due to take place in Oman this weekend had been cancelled. According to Oman's foreign minister, his Iranian counterpart Abbas Araghchi had earlier said that such talks were unjustifiable while Israel's attacks continued. Meanwhile, waves of overnight Iranian strikes on Israel have killed at least 10 people, including children, according to state emergency services. As per Israeli local media, 6 people have been reported dead and some 7 people are still considered missing after a missile strike on a residential building in Bat Yam. Meanwhile, the death toll in this missile strike on the northern city of Tamra has risen to 4. Israel's military has said that its forces intercepted 7 drones launched towards its territory as air raid sirens sounded in the country's north. Moreover, a spokesperson for Israel's National Emergency Service has said that around 200 people were wounded in overnight missile strikes fired by Iran. Iran's paramilitary Revolutionary Guard has also claimed that Iranian missiles targeted fuel production facilities for Israeli fighter jets. Furthermore, the Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen claim to have launched 2 ballistic missiles at Israel in the past day in coordination with Iran. Meanwhile, Israel's operation against Iran is expected to take weeks, not days, and is moving forward with implicit U.S. approval, according to White House and Israeli officials. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned in a video address that Israel will strike every site and every target of the Ayatollah's regime. In response, Iran has threatened to intensify these attacks if Israel continues hostilities. Here's what the Israeli Prime Minister had to say.
בזמן הקרוב ביותר אתם תראו את מטוסי ישראל, את חיל האוויר של ישראל, הטייסים שלנו, מעל שמי טהרן. אנחנו נפגע בכל אתר בכל מטרה של משטר האייתולות, ומה שהם הרגישו עד עכשיו הוא כאין וכאפס למה שהם ירגישו תחת נחת זרוענו בימים הקרובים. קודם כל, פגענו בתוכנית הזאת פגיעה ממשית. דבר השני, ואתם ראיתם את זה, יש איום עצום של הטילים הבליסטיים. אתם רואים כל טיל כזה שנופל, רואים מה זה עושה, ושוב, העמידה שלכם היא מופלאה. Doing with the support, the clear support of the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and the American people, and many others in the world. So with God's help, and with the goodwill and resolution of all free societies, we shall win.
According to the Israeli military, the Air Force carried out an extensive series of intelligence-based strikes on a number of targets in Tehran, including the headquarters of Iran's Ministry of Defense. Moreover, Iran has said that Israeli strikes targeted South Pars natural gas field and Shahran oil depot. In response, the Israeli military has stated that it targeted sites related to the Iranian regime's nuclear weapons project. Iranian media has said that Israeli attacks have killed at least 80 people and wounded 800 others over the past 2 days, including 20 children. Now we have guest Peter Baum. He's a foreign editor at Weekly Bliss, joining us live from London. Thank you for joining us today. Could this be part of a broader Israeli attempt to shift global focus from Gaza to Iran? And
I doubt it. I don't think the objective of the Israeli government by attacking Iran was to deflect from the Gaza situation at all. I think the Israeli government had been planning such an attack on Iran for weeks and took this opportunity because they felt, rightly or wrongly, that Iran was probably at its weakest position that it had been for decades, simply because the Iranian proxies, such as Hamas, such as Hezbollah, such as the previous Assad government in Syria, and also the Houthis, have been dramatically weakened. And in that respect, the Netanyahu government have been proved right. We've seen no military assistance from Hamas. They probably don't have the ability to do so anymore. We've seen nothing from Hezbollah because they have been dramatically weakened. Syria have decided to stay out of the conflict, and if anything, are quite secretly pleased that the Iranians are being so damaged, because don't forget, the Iranians were huge supporters of the Assad regime, which has been toppled in Syria. So to answer your question, I don't think it had anything to do with deflecting from Gaza, but more to do with taking advantage of what the Israelis to be perceived to be Iranian weakness.
And focusing on the diplomatic front, with nuclear talks cancelled in Oman, according to you, is diplomacy effectively dead in the water here?
At the moment, I would say yes, because I think there's a bigger game going on here. It's clear from the recent statements of Mr. Trump and from his actions, and also the actions of the UK government, that it's potential that regime change within Iran could actually be a reality now, whereas in previous skirmishes that was off the table. But now it's very possible, with the dilution of the Iranian armed wing, their major generals and commanders, with the attacks now on Iranian infrastructure, which will devastate the Iranian economy more than previously, and with Israeli assets and Mossad working within Iran to destabilize the regime and carry out assassinations. I think we're looking at a wider picture here. The focus definitely, in my opinion, being on regime change, and therefore I think diplomacy, although we'll hear the usual rhetoric from the United Nations and from other interested parties that both Iran and Israel should come to the table and de-escalate. I think there is a commitment amongst Israel and her allies for total regime change within Iran.
And now staying on diplomacy, with Putin, who is known to be Iran's ally, and Trump, both calling for de-escalation, could this open a path for back-channel diplomacy?
Almost certainly it could, but it's interesting. I think the most interesting aspect of this is what Putin has said. Now, don't forget, Putin was a huge investor in Assad Syria, and when Assad was toppled, the Israelis made sure that all the Russian military assets that had propped up Assad were totally destroyed. So Putin doesn't really have a say in the game here, other than from a political, or as you say, call it diplomatic point of view. And the fact that he has sided with Trump's statements indicates to me that he is almost assigned to the fact that the Iranian regime that was so supportive of him and vice versa is in a position of so much weakness that it's possible that he has been backing the wrong horse for the last 15 years, because the Ayatollah and his totalitarian theocrats who have been ruling since the late 70s are under such severe pressure that it really is possible now that they may be overthrown.
And that naturally raises this question about what role is Russia trying to play here by offering to mediate these talks? Can Moscow still be credible as a mediator here?
Can Moscow still be credible? Possibly, but I think this Trump sees this as an opportunity to pressure Putin regarding Ukraine, because Putin's commitment to Iran and formerly Syria has been proven to be a losing commitment. And I think this gives Putin some kind of credibility, a way out to act as an honest broker and have some influence on the international stage. But realistically, all Putin wanted was military influence, and I'm afraid that has been severely diluted since Assad was toppled in Syria, and since Iran's proxies have also been weakened, and now Iran itself.
Thank you very much, Peter Baum, for joining us and sharing your expertise as a foreign editor. Now, well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.